Welcome back. In this video, we are going to look at the compose option selector, which allows us to create a drop-down menu, which basically is what we want in our unit converter, because we want the user to have the option to select multiple options when clicking on a button, right? So that's what we're gonna achieve with a drop-down menu, and we prepared everything pretty much for it. So let's do the final steps around it. So in Compose, the drop-down menu component enables the creation of the option selector. It's like a menu and can display a list of choice using its child element drop-down menu item. And we have already provided a container and a trigger for it, although not functioning. So the trigger will be the button click event that we have. So let me see. So this on click event that we have in both cases. And now we will create a drop-down list for each selector. And I'm going to put it inside of those boxes, right? So we have these two boxes here, 1 and 2. And underneath the buttons, that's where I want to put down the drop-down menu. You see there's the drop-down menu and then there's the drop-down menu item. So we have the menu and then we have multiple items that we can have inside of that drop-down menu. So let's start with the drop-down menu as we have it here. So here first we have this expanded Boolean. So it's a Boolean which says, is it expanded? So is the drop-down menu open or is it closed? And I'm going to say it should be false. So that means that initially the menu is closed. So then we have this on dismiss request, which is this one here. And by default, it is closed. So let me also get rid of the preview at this point. And by default, it is empty. So we can say what should happen once we dismiss the drop-down menu, basically. For now, we're going to leave it empty. It's the callback when the menu is dismissed, basically. So inside of those curly brackets now, that's where the drop-down menu items will be added. So we put them down here. So we can go ahead and create a drop-down menu item like so. We can have a text for that drop-down menu item and an on-click event that we can define. So here, this one will be centimeters. So actually this will be a text that will say text. So this will contain another composable, so a text composable, which contains the text property called centimeters. Centimeters. So a centimeter is like 1/3 of an inch, roughly speaking. And then what should happen on click? Well, this is where we define the action when the item is clicked. For now, we're going to leave that out because we need to understand state before we can actually do that. Then we need another drop-down item, and actually let me put that into separate lines so it's a little more readable, like so. So this is one drop-down menu item. We need another drop-down menu item, which is gonna say meters. All right. And then we are going to have a final one. And then we're going to have another one, which will say feet. And a third one, or fourth one it is, I think, which says millimeters. Now you could also add inches and all of that stuff, but I think that should be fine for now, okay? You can obviously extend it later on if you want to, do whatever you want, but this is just how our drop-down menu should look like by default. At least that's how our drop-down menu will look like for now, okay? So the text is really just used to define the text content of the menu item. Each drop-down menu contains a text composable with the item label, such as in our case centimeters, meters, and so forth. So we have defined what it should look like, and you can see that this text is not expecting a string, it is expecting a composable. So we needed to pass a composable to it. And what we did, we added a composable of type text, which then this composable itself has the text property of type string. So this might be a little confusing for a beginner, but you will get a hang of it once you use it a little more. So now that we have done it for our first box, so the drop-down menu items, let's go ahead and add another drop-down menu for our second button too. And at this point, nothing will even be displayed. So if we compare that here and we look at our drop-down menu, you can't even see it yet, because the thing is, we have it as expanded false. If I set to expanded true, you can see, at least in the preview, this little white box here will appear, and that indicates that the drop-down menu exists. Okay, but it doesn't understand the content of it, at least in the previewer. So we can only see it once we actually manage that it should be expanded true once we click on the button up here. Okay, that's what we want to achieve. That's why we combine everything inside of a box, because we want everything to be in the same context. All right, so now that we have that, let's go ahead and copy this drop-down menu, including its items, and put it underneath here as well. And it will look pretty much the same. So now if I set that to true, in the preview, we will see that now the right-hand button has a drop-down menu underneath it. All right. Let me actually see what will happen once I set this to true. Okay, in both cases, I'm going to set it to true. So both are expanded. Both drop-down menus should be expanded now. Let's run it on our app and see whether we're going to get both drop-down menus expanded directly with the text included. And you can see we do. All right, so we do have those two texts. We can see centimeters, meters, feet, millimeters in both cases. Now, something that I'm not super happy with is that those two don't have any spacer in between them, the two boxes. So box number 1, this one, and box number 2, they don't have anything in between. So we can add a spacer here, which changes the modifier, or has a modifier, dot width of, let's also use 16dp. So 16dp is just a default value that is usually given and used whenever working with Android user interfaces. All right, so it's either 8 or it's 16 or it's 32. So these are just default values. And you will also notice that whenever you open an application, that you usually have a little bit of a edge in all applications. That's usually 8 density pixels that are set by default. All right, and now our app will look even better. And I'd say that's pretty much it for this video. In the next one, I'm going to summarize the day, because for today we have enough, but tomorrow we will need to go further and look at state management and events. And there we are. It looks a lot better because now they are not so close together, and I really highly prefer this over what we had before. So I hope you enjoyed this so far. We have built a user interface, and that's really the goal of today. And tomorrow we will finish the application. So see you in the next video.